Okay, so let's recap. We are meeting with our prospect and we are making a presentation. Since the objective of the presentation is for us to ultimately make a sale to the prospect and to convert them into a client, our goal is to persuade them to make a decision. Although it would be wonderful if after listening to our presentation, all of our prospects would stand up, raise their hands into the air and shout, "Hallelujah, we want to buy," that will never happen. At least it's never happened to me.
What occurs instead is that the relationship salesperson and the prospect have a jousting match, at which point the prospect raises objections. A good definition of an objection is anything that the prospect says or does that presents a barrier or a roadblock to the smooth completion of a sale. Since an objection can come into a presentation at any time, it's important that the relationship salesperson learn to get comfortable with objections and to accept them as part of the challenge.
Many sales dudes fear objections. They think that objections mean that their prospect no longer wants to buy their product, that the deal is off the table and no sale will be made, that they've blown it. No. They've got it all wrong. When a prospect raises objections, they're giving you a buying signal. They're showing you that they're interested in what you're talking about, but you need to convince them further. By raising objections, they are often leading you down the path that you need to follow to close them. For this reason, the relationship salesperson must learn to welcome objections.
Let me put this another way. Remember earlier we talked about the bobblehead doll prospect who simply shook his head and smiled throughout your presentation? Remember, we also talked about the fact that these are the worst prospects to have because they never buy? For that reason, embrace objections. It means that your prospect is listening and is engaged. The best way to successfully handle objections is to understand where they come from. There are a variety of reasons why prospects object. Among the reasons, some prospects really dislike change or making decisions. They prefer the comfort of remaining in the status quo. They may have had an unpleasant experience with you or your business in the past and don't want to make a change, even though your presentation is compelling. Perhaps you should have watched this program earlier and you didn't communicate your key selling points, or they're still not sold on you yet. Maybe they just don't like you. All of these are potential reasons why an objection could arise.
Sometimes, when the prospect makes an objection, they aren't telling you the entire story, and it's up to the relationship salesperson to dig in and try to figure out what the core of the problem is. For example, the first objection strategy that I'm going to talk about is what I call the see more. See more is not just a man's name, but also a strategic approach that some prospects take. A see more wants to see more. They are constantly telling you that they need more and more information and that they need to see more and more stuff. In reality, what they are telling you is that there are some unanswered points in your presentation that, until correctly addressed, will prevent you from getting the sale. Your job is to find them.
Another type of objection is the iceberg. As you know, icebergs float in the ocean and typically only a small part of the iceberg is exposed above the surface, with the largest part of its mass underwater. This became very apparent to the Titanic. The way an iceberg objection works is that a prospect advises you that there is a problem, but the salesperson must determine if the objection being raised is the actual problem or if there is something else, far greater, more significant, that they need to uncover.
For example, a salesperson has made a comprehensive proposal that includes itemized and detailed pricing to their prospect. Although the prospect seems very enthusiastic about the service, they repeatedly raise objections to some of the itemized prices. Although on one hand, the prospect has a right to question anything within the proposal, if enough of these points are raised, the salesperson may begin to wonder if there are some greater problems regarding the economic health of this prospect or other concerns that they're not yet aware of. To respond to this, the salesperson needs to dig deeper.
When a prospect raises objections, the salesperson needs to keep a positive attitude. It is your job to help resolve their objections and to put them at ease. Do your very best to stay cool and not get defensive. Because as I mentioned earlier, for the most part, objections are buying signals. You just need to learn how to handle them correctly. Here's a good method to respond to a prospect's objection. First, listen very carefully and hear your customer out. Second, repeat the objection back to your prospect to confirm your understanding of it. Third, acknowledge the objection from the prospect's point of view. As I've mentioned numerous times, Relationship selling is all about thinking from your prospect's perspective. Fourth, then answer the objection as best you can. And if you do not have the information available to answer the objection at that moment, make sure that you commit to a time that you will respond and ensure that your prospect has accepted your answer. On the other hand, if you have successfully answered the prospect's objection, you may wish to try to close the sale. What I mean here is that the prospect gave you a buying signal via their objection. You correctly responded and answered their question, and that sometimes makes a good transition towards trying to close the sale. Remember what I told you about this being a jousting match?
There are many different ways to answer objections. You have to find what works best for you. I'm a detailed research guy, so I try to pre-think or anticipate many of my prospects' objections in advance, and if they arise, I am well prepared for the response. I often enhance the credibility of my responses by providing case studies or examples of similar situations that may have occurred in the past. The most important thing to remember is that you have to relieve the prospect's pain. When you're in a selling situation and your prospect is on the receiving end, they are afraid to make a mistake. Many of their objections are raised to offset their fears and to protect themselves. If you can give them peace, you are closer to the sale.
Here's an example of an objection that frequently came up in my business. It's called the boomerang objection. This objection is raised as a negative, but when you respond or throw it back to your prospect, you've transformed it into a positive. My company represented several of the nation's largest cell phone companies. When proposing new business relationships with prospects, we always disclosed who our other clients were. Frequently, prospects would say, "We'd love to work with you, but we're apprehensive because you already have a relationship with our competitors." To handle this objection, we'd first acknowledge it and agree that it's valid. Next, we tell the prospect we have non-disclosure agreements with each of our clients that prohibit us from sharing any internal information with other companies. We also have separate account teams handling each client so there's no overlap. If we'd stopped there, it would have been sufficient, but we didn't. We kept going. We took their objection to our working with their competitor and converted it into a positive. We told the prospect that the expertise that we derived from working with those competitors made us better suited than anyone else to service their business. In short, this new prospect would reap the benefits of our experience with their competitors without any of the cost.
Another objection is known as the deal breaker. The deal breaker is just what its name indicates. You can't effectively resolve the objection. Boy, do I hate these, but they do occasionally arise. For example, let's say you're a t-shirt manufacturer who can produce no more than 10,000 shirts per month. You have a prospect who tells you that they would like to do business with your firm, but to meet their needs, you need to provide them with 25,000 shirts per month. This is a deal breaker. Now, there are some salespeople that may try to identify alternate manufacturing channels, but as applicable to their own specific plant, producing 25,000 shirts per month when they only have the capacity to produce 10,000 means that this task is impossible, a deal breaker.
Not all of the objections raised by my wireless clients had happy endings like the boomerang story we just talked about. We were pitching another cellular company that said they would like to work with us, but only if we resigned another of our clients. Although we would have liked to have established a new relationship, the existing client was much larger and was a long-term partner with our agency. No matter how hard I negotiated, the prospect company held fast to their demand that we resign the current client. Since we didn't, this became a deal breaker. You can't win them all. Coming up, we'll look at putting all the pieces together in asking for the sale.
It's quiz time. Time to see what you've learned. Question number 1. Which of the following statements about objections is false? Is it A, an objection is anything that the prospect says or does that presents a barrier or a roadblock to the smooth completion of a sale? Is it B, an objection is a deal breaker and means you will not complete the sale? Is it C, when a prospect raises objections, they're giving you a buying signal? Or D, when a prospect raises an objection, they're telling you that you need to convince them further before they'll make a purchase decision?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3,
And the answer is B. An objection is a deal breaker and means you will not complete the sale is false. An objection is simply anything that the prospect says or does that presents a barrier or roadblock to the completion of the sale. Question number 2. When a prospect keeps asking you to see more, what are they really telling you? Is it A, that there are unanswered points in your presentation? B, they don't like your product or service, but they're too polite to tell you? C, they like spending time with you and just want to talk? Or D, they weren't paying attention and you should start your presentation again?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And the answer is A. When prospects keep asking you to see more, they're really telling you that there are unanswered points in your presentation. Question number 3. Which objection technique forces the salesperson to question if the objection being raised is the real problem or merely a cover-up for something else? Is it A, deal breaker, B, boomerang, C, iceberg, or D, Seymour?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And the answer is C. The iceberg might be a cover-up for something else. Question number 4. Which of the following statements about responding to objections is false? Is it A, you should repeat the objections back to your prospect to confirm your understanding of it? B, you should acknowledge the objection from the prospect's point of view? C, after successfully answering the objection, it's often a good time to try and close the sale? Or D, all of these statements are true?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And the answer is D. All of those statements are true. Repeat the objection back to your prospect to confirm your understanding. Acknowledge the objection from your prospect's point of view. And after successfully answering the objection, it's often a good time to close the sale. Question number 5. In which of these strategies do you take a legitimate negative prospect objection and turn it into a positive? Is it A, boomerang, B, Seymour, C, iceberg, or D, deal breaker?
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And the answer is A. Boomerang is when you take a legitimate negative prospect objection and turn it into a positive. So to recap, remember that an objection is anything that the prospect says or does that presents a barrier or roadblock to the smooth completion of the sale. When a prospect raises objections, they're giving you a buying signal. They're telling you that you need to convince them further and leading you down the path that you need to follow in order to close them. When responding to objections, first, listen very carefully. Hear your customer out. Second, repeat the objection back to the prospect to confirm your understanding. Third, acknowledge the objection from the prospect's point of view. Fourth, answer the objection as best you can. If you can't, tell the prospect when you will be able to answer it. And fifth, if appropriate, try to close the sale. Congratulations! You've completed Chapter 8. In Chapter 9, Asking for the Sale, you'll learn how to close the sale and turn your prospect into your customer.